Welcome to the Public Service Leadership Academy's Leadership Insight Series. The Leadership Insight Series is intended to share the experience and expertise of senior executives with rising leaders in the public sector about important topics such as presidential transition, leading in times of crisis, and advice to leaders in government on the qualities and capabilities important when they're making hiring and promotion decisions. Today, we're talking to Mika Cross, a federal workplace expert. So welcome to, Mika, and thank you so much for spending time with us today. Can you give us a little bit about your background and how your journey to being a workplace expert?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here. Well, it's funny that word expert gets thrown around a lot. Really, I got my start in public service in uniform. So I worked in the United States Army, enlisted, and then transitioned over to the commissioned officer side. After 9/11, I landed in the US intelligence community working on policies and procedures for deployed civilians, contractors, military members, and of course, core mission areas of the intelligence community. But I started really digging into how we were going to reintegrate the folks that were deployed and how we were going to support their families while they were deployed, even if they were civilian, contractor, or didn't belong to us at all and were maybe a member of the international governments. From there, I worked in human capital areas, from work life to wellness to equal opportunity and diversity initiatives, stood up conflict management centers, and then jumped over in 2010 to the United States Department of Agriculture, where I was brought in to stand up the work life and wellness program, which at that time included the telework program, right after the Telework Enhancement Act was effectuated. So that program was really combined and an integral component of Secretary Vilsack's vision at the time in the last administration of what he called cultural transformation. And it was a really exciting time to be able to build policy, procedures, and also really achieve culture change as it related to how human capital policy affected the workforce and also how we could achieve cost savings and efficiencies. We won a lot of awards over at USDA, kind of got put on the map as a best practice in government. We helped OPM in their advisory committee as they rolled out telework best practices. And then I got into employee engagement and leadership development and kind of traipsed around government a little bit more before I joined the private sector for a few years, where I'm happy to bring back best practices and promising practices from industry to share across the federal public sector space as well.
Well, that's quite a menu of things and successes that you've had. And it's interesting that, we were talking before we started this that we'd never really met before. And given the fact that I focus a lot of my time on customer experience, and employee experience and employee engagement is such a critical part of customer experience, we'll have to see what else we can cook up here, because it really is critical to culture change and driving mission delivery. And today we're faced with, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, hopefully on the tail end of the global pandemic. We've all been working from home for the past year. And of course, parents have been, homeschooling and trying to make decisions about whether their kids go to school. Do they stay home? Do they go back? Do they have a hybrid situation? And then, of course, everybody's worried about their parents and grandparents. And I've had 2 shots, so I'm happy to report that I'm now double vaccinated and thrilled about it. So we're all, that's rolling out. And of course, we've been in the middle of a presidential transition over the past 6 months or whatever. And then with all the racial inequities in the country that have been happening, to drive really the presidential priorities. But as you look at where we are, and of course, the FEVS data is showing that the agencies and leaders across the government are really do care, or at least the employees feel that they do care about their health and safety, and they've communicated fairly well over this time, it was a great thing to hear. Is there anything else in the FEVS data that you wanted to point out? I haven't seen the full report. I don't know if you have. I don't think it's public yet. I keep checking. And then I also wanted to ask you, sort of advice to leaders, government leaders, as they balance these challenges, and priorities to get their job done, accomplish their mission, and then take care of all these other competing priorities.
Yeah, so Febs isn't public yet across the entire government space, but yes, I've taken a peek.
I thought you might.
um, I have a lot of friends in great places, so I do have some insider information about what's trending and going on, and it looks rather promising and pretty exciting if
Mhm,
you consider the correlation between this heightened remote work and extended telework, along with the kinds of flexibilities that were required to be able to keep the government moving. And also in consideration of those who weren't necessarily able to work from home and had to still be in the workplace, the physical workplace, the numbers and the percentages of employee satisfaction in areas like feeling like their safety, health, and wellness were being considered, and the fact that they felt pretty satisfied overall with the level of communication and the feelings of perception that their supervisors were really keeping them in the loop and
mhm.
still moving towards a common goal, and that they had the resources they need to get the job done, is a pretty great indicator that we can do this in this kind of environment. And this was the greatest experiment of all, right?
Right.
In some cases, pre-pandemic, it looked as though, some agencies were maybe participating 2 to 4% of their entire eligible workforce on a regular recurring basis of like more than 3 days a week. And now, fast forward, we saw some agencies upwards of 92% or more participating in remote work every day during the height of the pandemic, according to the FEBS pandemic scores. And when you look at the satisfaction levels of the same agencies who were heavily focused on allowing remote work and really relied on that to keep the mission going, the satisfaction rates of telework programs specifically were through the roof, over 90% in some
Mhm.
instances as well. So there's a strong correlation between satisfaction, employee engagement indices, and then flexibility. Go figure. We've been talking about that for a long while. But clearly, not everyone is going to want to continue working this way. In fact, many people are chomping at the bit to get back to,
Right.
regular life and socialize with people, especially considering those who might have been working in isolation and alone, which many junior ranking, less tenured federal employees were in fact doing. Didn't have the benefit of establishing long time work relationships, those
Right.
relationships that carry us through when you're talking about employee experience that then translate to customer experience as well. So I think there are some really key learnings to pay attention to. I will also say, though, what's really going to be telling is as agencies review the FEVs, paying attention to who's indicating the reasons why they may plan to depart the agency in the next year and the percentages. Some organizations who might not have done as well are seeing higher levels of indications that their workforce may leave, upwards to 30% indicating that they may leave in the next year. So there are some really important data points to pay attention to when you're considering your strategies, especially as it relates to impact on engagement and productivity, because productivity can dip if not done right when you're looking at your back to office plans.
Yeah, and I would assume that as we return to whatever this new normal is going to be, the guidance that OPM is going to come out with is hopefully going to give agencies a little bit of flexibility based on their own mission. But I know, Chicos are going to want to have some level of, guidance so that they can get some people in the office if they need to. But you're right, the agencies that have a more flexible policy are are going to be, they're going to be competing for the workforce, right? Because people are going to start looking for those agencies, especially people who have moved or, have now found that they didn't need to, spend 3 hours a day on the road. I also found it interesting that we're now looking, I guess, at, telework versus remote work, right? So those and some of that's been done in the past, but there's lots of issues to be worked out. So it'll be interesting to see, how that unfolds. I also wanted to ask you about, this is one of the first times that we've really seen, well, of course it's global, right? It's around the world, but in the federal government, all of the C-suite working together, right? So you see HR policies and the IT, and everything had to kind of work in concert to be able to provide this kind of environment for um, everybody to telework and to remote work. I mean, people were moving all over the country and working in different places. Have you seen specific
Mhm.
ways that leaders can really ensure that their teams feel, connected, part of a team? How do leaders like handling performance management issues based on your experience?
First and foremost, I'll talk about team camaraderie and sort of, the myth that was busted over this past year was that, collaboration and team camaraderie on morale is only happening if you're physically in the office all together. And that clearly wasn't the case. But, agency leaders who got this right were leveraging a variety of tactics in order to engage the workforce, had choices and different kinds of modalities in order to get information out to the workforce and also check in on a one-on-one basis. So there's like the collective of how you communicate across a large organization that's disparate, and then how are you checking in, and also providing opportunities to sort of build those office and team protocols that maybe aren't considered technically work related, meaning not focused on the technical skills, but are still designed around how we connect and collaborate with one another, and that relationship building piece in this remote environment. It was really interesting to see. So, even just leveraging basic tools like being able to have a central location on a SharePoint site, internally, and making sure that stays current, welcoming new employees in different ways, hosting formal and formal opportunities to get together, and is bring in the employee assistance program and be able to focus on real issues that are affecting people, like avoiding burnout and focusing on productivity, and dealing with stress and anxiety during this global pandemic, and building it in as part of the workday to focus on together, finding other ways to communicate outside of just email and newsletters and town halls and those sorts of things, which are all great and important, but also allowing some degree of choice, because when you're talking about a work, different preferences and how they communicate and connect with one another.
Yeah, and I know, when I was at GSA, and as we talked about before, I was brought up, with the saying, it's not what you do, it's where you are, right? So, Martha Johnson at GSA was a big proponent of telework very early on, and you just learn some of those techniques in terms of even calendar invites and putting meetings on the, call in numbers and everything, which we're all doing. But some agencies weren't doing it before, and they didn't even have collaboration platforms to be able to do it. So it's been a great, as you mentioned, it's a great experiment. And it's almost like an immersion of a language, right? Like you just jump in feet first, and whatever comes up, you solve the problem and keep moving forward. What about, do you think that government leaders really, I mean, I've had several conversations with people who are worried that their bosses are going to make them come back in the office full time. Do you think people have really learned, maybe the feds data will show us that people can really do their work, from home, accomplish their mission?
I'm a little on the fence with that one, because I do feel like even though this transition to, remote and telework, I'll call it hybrid. We've been working in a hybrid environment really over the last year, has obviously given us more expertise and experience doing so, I feel like the focus was still on the where, because everyone was still, for the most part, in the same place, meaning you're at home and I'm at home and they're at home. So we're still sort of in a similar location, just in different geographic places, right? What I mean by that is everyone's operating off of the same digital workspace. What happens when some are in the physical office and some are in another office? I think the focus really needs to be, because this was the safety piece, is that everyone's working from home. So it's okay because everyone's in the same scenario. We're not always going to be everyone all the time, everywhere. Again, it's not a one size fits all. You know this from the work that you did at GSA. I know this from the work that I've done implementing these kinds of programs across different government agencies and organizations. So I really hope that we are able to pause and focus on the how and the when and the why, and less about the where. Because if you have a unified digital workspace experience for everyone, where you're also able to really elevate and harness the power of the tools that you're using in this centralized workspace, which we can do if agencies now start taking the next step, which isn't just providing access to all the documents you have and the shared spaces you have, but actually leveraging the power of it to work more efficiently together. Then you're creating a premier employee experience where people can collaborate better. Maybe some of the tools that we use, even as simple as Zoom and Teams and Slack and Skype for Business, can be enabled with better capabilities, because in a unified digital workspace you're able to give more bandwidth to, a video platform, regardless if you go in on the app versus the web-based tool. So I think this is an opportunity for us to really start thinking about, again, not the where are we going to work, but the how and the when, because that's the most important thing. And you're an evangelist of all things customer and user experience. Well, let's turn it inward and figure out
Right.
how to level the playing field for everyone, overcoming that distance bias, which can obviously in the past and has really affected workplaces, between those who telework and aren't around and those who are in
Right.
the office and putting in
Right.
the extra hours. That's not necessarily a badge of honor, and it doesn't have to be the way that we
Right.
work together.
Yeah, I do think that people who were working from home more than the people who were working in the office were at a disadvantage in the past,
Yes.
because they didn't pick up on the hallway conversations, or the you know hang out in the kitchen for the for a drink or whatever. But it's also interesting thing. I mean, I think we have a ways to go. I think that we've learned a lot, but I think even things like virtual backgrounds and stuff will take away the where are you really, are you really working from home, or are you working from the beach, right? Even they nobody will know because you've got a virtual background. Or
Yeah.
we've also learned everybody's a little more compassionate about, a kid climbing into somebody's lap, or a dog climbing up on you, or a cat. I've seen some crazy cat, situations with them, climbing across the computers and stuff. And so hopefully those kind of things have made us all a little more human too, as we go forward. And even the way people dress. I mean, it's,
Absolutely. You're more
it's
comfortable. You're at home. At the same time, sometimes there's an inclination for leaders to wanna, I wanna always see you on your camera because then I know you're working. Well, if you don't allow for some choice, you risk things like, and I'm sure we've all heard of it, Zoom fatigue. And there
right.
is nothing I dislike more than having to, and this is not one of them, so don't take meetings. I need to take a meeting by phone now and then. I'd like to do a walk and talk if I'm doing a check-in and I don't have to take notes or collaborate in a document. I need to get sun on my face, take a stretch, and I need a lunch break. So stop scheduling meetings during my lunch break.
Right. Right.
So I mean, I'm just thinking about what you said earlier around how we humanize what work is,
Right.
and giving choice, no matter choice of location or choice of how you engage and connect with one another, is really critical and key also.
And I think we're also learning that it does kind of translate from people thinking that they knew what people were doing if they could see them at work, and now they're seeing them on Zoom, right? And there is a difference in the stress level for people when they're just talking on the phone versus communicating and watching and seeing them their own face on the screen, and like being able to see each other eye to eye.
Yeah.
However, I think it also reduces a lot of multitasking and, makes people pay attention more. So where do you, it's almost like, how do federal managers and leaders really come to be able to, you do what's best for you, and as you say, give them choice in what works for them?
I think I like to design, a guide for different kinds of meetings. So, if I'm doing a one-on-one check-in, maybe I give my direct report the opportunity to take the phone by call or by video. Maybe I ask them, it's just a one-on-one check-in. How are you doing?
Right.
Want to do a walk and talk? We can do that a little less formally versus if I'm at a virtual town hall and I'm leading that as a manager or senior leader. I'm going to put in the invitation that the expectation is that if you're on duty and not on approved leave, that you're going to attend the virtual town hall because there's some really key information I want to make sure everybody gets.
Right.
I might also record the town hall and I might share my video or I might have slides with photos on them to show who the key leaders are in the organization. But because there's 790 people on the call, I'm not expecting everyone to be sharing their video versus a virtual coffee break where it's meant to just check in maybe with a group of 50, maybe to 75, it's 30 minutes, it's informal, or we do something that's like team building, like trivia. If
Right.
I set the parameters and we start again, making sure that we're communicating what the expectations are. I'm going to encourage that you attend. I would love to see that you turn on your cameras for this meeting. Here's a very specific agenda, and this is what we're going to stick to. We're going to start on time. We're going to end on time. And just modeling those good kinds of protocol, that's going to really help strengthen the way that the whole team works together, regardless again of location.
Yeah, and it goes back to just that building trust, right? Like it's, trusting that, some people, on your team work better in, different hours or different circumstances. And I love your idea about structuring different meetings different ways and giving people choices. What about how do you think agencies can help make this smooth transition back to whatever this new normal is? And I'm talking like HR and IT and, everybody, facilities, everything. I mean, you've got health and safety issues to worry about. You've got, social distancing probably to worry about.
There's so much to consider when you're thinking about your short, mid, and long term planning with regards to back to the office strategies.
Mhm.
And I think it's going to be a mix of ensuring you have, the indications of what the preferences are of your workforce and how have they been working during the pandemic. So, how have they already been working over the past year? What is their preference and appetite for whichever levels of flexibility you're going to offer or the hybrid offerings that you're doing? Are you going to allow for some remote work? Is it going to be position specific? Are you going to have a specific agreement? Are you able to, track cost savings and reprogram that or reallocate that into investments elsewhere like IT and training?
Right.
Um, but first, matching up preference with also the policy piece. And then comes the change management, right? It would be my opinion that they would roll out a phased approach where teams could decide. And here's where it gets really interesting. Why not really empower the supervisors, the managers, and the leaders of organizations, even down to the lowest level, to make the right decisions for their workforce? In this environment, I think we need to give the power back to leaders. We say that we do, but then there are 2 and 3 levels of
Right.
approvals when it comes to telework or remote work.
Right.
You are in charge of certifying time and approving leave and writing performance appraisals, you should have the ability to decide how your team is going to work, how you are going to also hold them accountable and still get your mission done. I firmly believe we need to empower our leaders to lead the teams and make the right decisions. That said, there does need to be a more universal framework, which includes, again, that investment in like a unified experience when it comes to the systems that we use and the collaboration tools. Maybe there's an investment before we move back in training around how we're going to conduct our meetings in a hybrid environment, how we're going to certify our time in a hybrid environment, what the implications are, so people can also make the right choices. Some folks might consider that they want to, move to rural Maine, where I'm from, but they didn't know that there are potentially RIF implications or, a 25% locality pay adjustment if I do that. Maybe that changes my mind around wanting remote work. So there's going to be a significant investment in change management and internal communications to make this piece work. And it's really going to take all sections and all arms of the organization to get it right.
Yeah, I agree. That locality pay issue is a big deal that, people do need to consider in terms of, where they live and work. And if they've gotten used to living and working in the Washington, D.C. area,
Absolutely.
the other higher cost of living areas. Is there anything else about like how the government has responded to the pandemic in terms of the workforce or recommendations going forward that you want to address before we kind of talk about more general kind of workforce leadership issues?
Yeah, I think, just in general, it hasn't just been location flexibility for this workforce over the past year and change. It's also sort of been a results only work environment. It's had to be that way because, again, as you mentioned, we've had um, loss and grief and medical concerns and health challenges and children and caregivers and
Right.
spouses, partners, roommates, you name it, it just keeps coming. The distractions are here. Life is happening in the midst of our work. And a lot of it is still out of our control. This is still not business as usual. We are still working in a crisis, even though it's been for the long haul. People sometimes forget that.
Right.
This is not your traditional telework, remote work environment. It's not your optimal one. That said, we've had practice in really being creative in how we're going to allow flexibility with extended leave options, start times, end times,
Right.
no restrictions on taking away the core hours for some,
Right.
the ability to work on weekends, evenings. I
Right.
mean, really, this has been a larger scale flexible work pilot project, right? In terms of building structure around a results only work environment. And so I just encourage people to carry that through. You've practiced empathy, you've practiced compassionate coaching, you've practiced listening and communicating in a different way with your team. And I just really encourage us all to think about how we're going to continue humanizing the workplace forevermore, really.
Yeah, I agree. Couldn't agree more. So thank you. I wanted to shift in terms of just overall leadership qualities and skills. And what do you think makes an outstanding leader? Characteristics. And you just mentioned a lot of them, so I'm not sure. All of those are certainly applicable in what normal situations for sure.
Well, you talked a little bit about what's happening in our communities and across the nation, also outside of just our workplace. There have been a lot of really challenging issues that are happening all across our country.
Mhm.
And if we think it doesn't affect our workforce, our team, our coworkers, our direct reports, we are sorely mistaken. And sometimes as leaders, we forget that just because we don't have the right thing to say, doesn't mean we shouldn't say something. And so I really think that there are characteristics of a good leader in this kind of environment and during crises, right? Which is to acknowledge what we don't know, to say when we don't know something and really be honest about that. Um, and to also be vulnerable and take a risk in the sense that you can say, I don't may not have the right words at the moment, but I want you to know you are heard, or giving people an opportunity to be able to express their feelings in a different way. That traditionally was thought of as warm and fuzzy. I mean, I'm an Army veteran. I come from a very military command and control
Right.
kind of career path. It's not something that we used to do, is talk about our, our how we feel and ourselves and all of these things. But if there's one thing we've learned over the past year and change, it's that there really is a focus on the whole person, and you have to as a leader. So I just encourage strengthening those skills and competencies, and also reaching out to your network of colleagues. I mean, mentoring doesn't stop. You can have peer-to-peer mentoring and coaches that help you along the way at the peer
Mhm.
level, no matter how high in the organization you are. I think that's really helpful to be able to bounce really challenging issues off of one another in a safe environment, and to also exchange best practices and how you can relate and build and engage staff.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially with the mentoring and having somebody that you can talk to, within your organization or outside, that you can just get another set of eyes and ears on to get feedback. Um, do you have any leadership challenges that you faced in the government, or that you want to share, and how you overcame them? Or um,
No, I never had any. No, I'm just kidding.
well,
Oh my goodness.
not
I mean,
everybody's going to share them, so that's your choice.
let me think. The challenges, I think, are all around us, right? Shortages of resources, people, people with the right skills,
Mhm.
time, and again, that kind of culture of empowerment to feel like you can actually effectuate change in your sphere of influence. I really have learned over time to filter priorities through what I can change and what I have power to make decisions over, versus the what might be out of my control, because that helps me to alleviate stress and anxiety a little bit more when I think about, and I also message that, what do we have control over? What can we change? What can we fix? Versus we know these things need to be addressed, but we don't have the power in our control, or it requires other stakeholders to be a part of that conversation. That's maybe longer term. So I like to think about challenges in those two buckets.
Mhm.
And also in terms of prioritizing, it's pretty simple, but what's urgent and important versus
Mhm.
urgent or important versus none of those things. And so trying to kind of tick away at what are the most pressing issues. What does Napa say? The grand challenges of the day, right? So,
Exactly. Well, I was thinking about, as you were talking about, when you have, as you're moving, progressing through your career. I know I had lots of ideas I wanted to get up to the right people, and I'm sure you did too. Do you have any advice for, when people are working in an agency and they really have some ideas on things that they think could improve? Any suggestions? I think it's a difficult one, because it's not easy to get your ideas heard.
it's not. Oh, so first and foremost, I like to start with like, what don't I know about the organization, or what don't I know about the larger organization's goals and objectives? So I might look in the strategic plan, or I might look in the employee engagement plan, or the human capital framework plan. And different areas of the organization, even that I might not have experience in, may have ongoing priorities. Maybe it's customer experience, user experience, um, and trying to find ways that my ideas might map to a current or ongoing initiative. That's another thing that your network comes in handy with, right? Is to try to ask those questions. Maybe
Right.
it's even diversity and inclusion.
Right.
um, you just might not know. So really trying to figure out, are your solutions mapping towards a larger scale enterprise wide problem, and can it help contribute to that? I like to start there. um, I think also bracing for no. So, even if you have a really great idea, you may not, the timing might not be right. It might
Right.
be about timing, it might be about resources, and just not feeling like that's going to deflate you, or take the wind out of your sails for continuing the great public service that you provide each and every day. I also realized over time that I made this decision though. I would decide to take those no's less personally and
Right.
just continue to kind of plow ahead.
Yeah, and that's a valuable lesson for people to learn. I know I used to tell everybody, at some point in your career, you're going to run into a boss that really doesn't like you. And it's nothing you've done, and it's not if it happens, it's when it happens and how you respond to it. And so those are very, very difficult situations, and you have many choices to make. But the kind of goes aligns with your, not taking no so personally. But I really liked taking your idea and trying to align it with an existing priority. And in many cases, those existing priorities have some resources behind them that you might be able to tap into, right? To be able to get your priority kind of, sucked into that one.
They're
Um,
absolutely right. And you in the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned the presidential transition. So like go look at the president's management agenda. Take a look at what's coming out in terms of executive orders from the White House. Even if it didn't translate down just yet, there are things that likely you can map to, whether it's people, technology, customer service, equity. There are ongoing initiatives that you can start with. And then last but not least, you can always just ask this one question to your supervisor. What can I take off your plate? Can you imagine being asked that as a leader? How many times have you been asked that? Probably not so many. But if our workforce starts to think about, okay, is there something that I can contribute to the larger good? How can I help my own supervisor and leadership team solve some complex challenges? Just by asking an open-ended question like that, you may find an in somewhere.
Yeah. I have actually seen one person do that where it was like, I want to do, it wasn't to me, but to somebody else to say, I want to do everything she doesn't want to do. I'll do
Yeah.
whatever she doesn't want to do. And it served her well, really, to do that. I mean, you mentioned presidential transition, and, what's your advice to people right now? They're career civil servants. Some of them may have never gone through a presidential transition before. And even if they have, this one's probably a little different than the last one. Um,
So my advice about this one right now, are you
yeah.
asking?
Yeah. I mean, you
Feel
mentioned
like
going
this
through
one
the.
is so different. I don't know. I feel like it's so calm for some reason. I'm so thankful for that. Like after the year that we've had, it's nice to have clarity in what the priorities are and
Mhm.
having a little grace to figure out how that aligns. I think many federal employees are welcoming that as well. So through the transition, again, considering managing up, taking a look at the broad scope of where your programs, where your mission, where your service areas can align with some of those priorities, and just trying to think ahead.
Right.
I am noticing in this particular administration, they are leaning on best and promising practices that have worked in the past as well. So if you have ideas, if you've been around the block, or maybe even you come from private industry and have some to share, I think leadership is open and willing to entertain new ideas around how we're going to solve some of these toughest challenges. So um, yeah, I think focusing on your and continuing the mission, but also again, sort of mapping and aligning what your work is and the priorities are is a good place to start.
Yeah, and you mentioned timing earlier. Sometimes you have a great idea, and the timing just isn't right. It's not part of that administration's priorities. Or I know, in my own situation with customer experience, it was always in the back of people's minds, and it was always, there's little inklings of mission delivery and customer service, but once you get an opening, you really have to be ready to take it and have those ideas kind of solidified. So um, I think you're absolutely right. And there's these best practices that have been tried out both from government and industry, and sharing them certainly saves the government a lot of time and energy. What
Absolutely.
about, when you're talking to people that want to go into the government, what is your advice about, should you look in industry? Should you look in government? What is it? What's the value of, going into being a public servant? Of course, I'm, a big fan of doing some time in the public sector. There's no greater joy than, you know, serving the citizens of this country and serving the president.
I agree with you hands down, and I actually just got back. I just got back. I did it in my house now. A couple weeks ago, I did a virtual career fair with future data scientists.
Oh,
So this was
nice.
with NIST.
Hmm.
And so we were just, volunteering our time to talk to students about public service and what it means. And I talked about a flexible career as a single mother and a female veteran, coming from uniform service into public service and then transitioning out. And I'll probably be back again. So, I think at the end of the day, there's no greater opportunity to serve your country, your fellow citizens, and there's something for everyone in the government. That said, I really like to manage expectations. I mean, it's the nation's largest employer. We have over 2 million
Right, right.
employees strong. It's obviously the oldest employer, and so are a lot of challenges with that. Is not going to look like Google
Not
or
easy.
Facebook, right?
Yeah,
We're not Yammer, we're not we're
right.
not Buffer, but we have the opportunity to serve in a way that you can't necessarily have in private industry, and it comes with great honor, and it comes with great pride and great impact. And so I like to just also manage the expectations in terms of, as a change agent, you can find ways to change on a small scale too, not always on the largest scale, but on a small scale. And you can start small and go big. And then in terms of, what you get back, I mean, my goodness, my whole career has been in service just about. So I can't speak enough about the opportunity that exists across the board in the US government. I'm one of those people that didn't just stay in one agency. I worked all over the place. And I probably, when I come back, will do the same thing. So
Well, we're going to have to get you to our Service to the Citizen Awards this year at the Willard on September 22nd, because I think you would absolutely love it.
that would be fabulous. I would
So,
love to join.
so we'll have to get you the information about that. I think as
Thank
we
you.
as we close up here, I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on where do you think the workplace will be, in the next year or two? Will we, obviously we're going to be transitioning back to some sort of hybrid environment, and any recommendations to OPM on, as they create this guidance?
Well, I'd really like to see an investment in remote leadership skills,
Mhm.
as well as the workforce in terms of, how do we thrive in a hybrid environment or in any environment with modern mobile skills that will translate regardless of where and when we're working. I think that's really important. And there's some great training that is already developed. I know of much in the private industry with remote companies who have already been remote first for a very long time. But that's where it starts, is in training the skills that are needed to thrive and succeed in this, hybrid and remote work environment, number one. And then number two, making certain that people can understand in plain language all of the options that are available to them, especially as it relates to HR policy. Right now, there's a lot of misunderstanding between telework versus
Right,
remote work.
right,
Is there a requirement to come in 2 days of pay period? Yes, but only if you're 50 miles or more outside of the local commuting area of your official duty station. There are a lot of misperceptions
right.
there. I think that there needs to be clarity, and that agencies need to understand what is permitted at the federal level so that they can start implementing their own local kind of guidance. And then last but not least, please don't forget to include the workforce, right? So from a customer experience perspective, making sure that not just the federal employee viewpoint survey, but that we are opening the doors for listening sessions and feedback sessions along the way as well, I think is going to be integral, not just at the OPM level, but at the agency level
Mhm.
too.
Mhm. Great advice. Is there anything else that we haven't covered today that you think would be important for people to hear or learn from your expertise and experience as they move forward in their careers in the federal government?
Well, as I mentioned, I was a single mom for a long time of two kids and had to navigate career advancement with also a need for flexibility. I moved to the DC area when I still was in the Army. At the time, I was married. I had two small children, and then I wasn't married anymore and still had two small children. So I only say that, I think as we focus more on the how and not as much on the why and when, you know, possibilities will start expanding and opportunities will start expanding. But as leaders, it's also up to us to model that humanization of work. It's
Great.
okay to have a life. It's okay to use flexibility. It's okay to want flexibility. And you can still succeed and have a successful career and lead first in this kind of an environment. And if you model and role model that kind of mentality, I think your workforce will be all the better for it because they will feel like they're not just having access to those policies, but that it's okay to use them too.
Right. Well, I'm not going to add one more word to that because that was beautifully said and great points. And I just want to thank you for your time tonight. And I look forward to continuing to keep in touch and seeing what trouble we can get into together.
That would be great. Thank you so much for having me. It was
Thank
absolute
you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.